Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have another great show for you this evening. We have Robert Schroeder, and he's going to be talking about solving the UFO Enigma. There's going to be a little bit of science involved. I hope that doesn't scare you. He's a great guy. I had him on way long ago, and back when my shows were 1 hour. And speaking of that, I want to make something clear. When people sign up for my subscription, I say that you have access to the archives, and that's true, but the 2-hour shows only started at 1:27. I think it was Linda Moulton Howe was the first 2-hour show I had. So it only goes back to 127. I just wanted to make that disclaimer because I always forget to say that. And so all the shows prior to that were free shows and 1-hour shows. And to support the show for $2 or more a month, all you have to do is go to podcastufo.com, and it's right on the menu bar. If you can't help us out, we appreciate every listener. If you'd like to listen to the full shows, all you have to do is check out YouTube on Wednesday. You can watch them live on Wednesday evening at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or on our website, podcastufo.com, playing both those times. And also, there's a lot of people listen over at the Dark Matter Digital Network. Hello to you over there. I started the show. One of the reasons I started the show is because I had been doing different podcasts for a long time. I still have first one that I started was the Antique Auction Forum. It's still going, actually. I started that back in 2009. So not too many people interested in UFOs are all that interested in antiques, but you never know. So the real reason I'm bringing this up is I have a show coming up on that kind of has a cross interest, because I have Dan Curry on, and he was an Emmy Award. He won 7 Emmy Awards and 15 nominations for visual effects on Star Trek. And so he's going to be on my Antique Auction Forum podcast next week. He might be on YouTube. We're trying to work that out. But he's going to be talking about his collection of Star Wars, behind the scenes memorabilia and stuff like that. So it might be something that you're not interested in, but I'm definitely going to be bringing up the topic of UFOs. I'm going to do it. Okay. All right, that's it. I'm going to bring in my buddy Alejandro Rojas. Hello, Alejandro.
Hello. So are you a little nervous about bringing up UFOs with your antique buddies?
Yeah, I might... Yeah, I might feel it out before I actually, somehow test the waters.
Just go for it. You know what's surprising these days, I think, is that because of this Department of Defense news, people are feeling, it's surprising how many people know about it, first of all. And people are feeling pretty good about UFO stuff, I think, these days. They're feeling more comfortable discussing it. I
had a casting agent wrote me today about... They're looking for people for a show, and they say they're going to make it like an Anderson Cooper, serious UFO show for the History Channel coming up.
That would be neat.
And so they're asking me to reach out to people for them.
The History Channel is trying a lot of stuff. They must have sent something out to production companies saying, hey, we want a UFO show, because I've gotten some calls, and it sounds like they're being approached from different angles with different ideas. So we'll see what comes of this. But it seems like they want another show and a couple other networks as well. So cross your fingers. I've talked to quite a few of these people myself, not just for, programs and stuff they can cover, but possibly myself being on one of these. So we'll see.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, I want to say to the YouTube listeners out there, check out Alejandro now. I mean, you got like a studio thing going there.
You like it?
You got a background. You have light, everything. Wow.
I've got background and lights. I'm going to get some cooler logos to put up here. I think that'll be kind of neat. I was trying to do something different, Everybody does green screen, which is kind of neat, but it's complicated. I got this other background that just didn't work out. And, you got to get the distances and everything worked out. But, yeah, this is pretty cool, I think, for now. And I'm hoping to do more videos, because people who follow our Open Mind YouTube probably will notice we haven't posted anything in a while. So I'm going to try to do some more videos, and people love videos,
I was doing green screen as you know, and I started like floating. So I just couldn't stop it. All these weird things and
weird things.
Yeah,
well,
like
your
you said,
background's cool.
Yeah, it's just a photographer's background. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll be able to sell. Make some money.
Yeah, like
Selling.
was it QVC TV or something? Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking I've got some like stickers that's gonna put like here's hack for it, that event that Mark and Ben.
Yeah.
But that might be too small.
Yeah.
Dial
in now for 99 cents.
Yeah, for $100, Podcast UFO can be behind Alejandro Rojas.
We'll sign everything. Yeah. So what's happening in the UFO world?
Yeah, lots of cool stuff going on, in my humble opinion. I do want to plug, Tyler Rogaway, the guy I interviewed this week, because he was great. He writes for another person who, because of the DoD news, felt emboldened to be able to write about UFOs, something he has an interest in. And he started off and he said, aerospace people, pilots, they all have an interest in UFOs. He says if they say they don't, they're lying. So he knows this because he's a journalist that writes for defense, and he writes about Lockheed Martin, Skunk Works, all of this really cool stuff. And he has tackled a couple UFO stories recently, one of which just hit the headlines. You and I have talked about this Arizona event, and New Mexico, where these pilots saw something. But he has an even much better one, which is this flight from California to Oregon, where they had seen an object that was caught on radar. The control tower asked the pilots, "Hey, does anybody see this?" Many pilots chimed in and said, "Yeah, we see it. We see it." They described it as this bright object that was very large, as large as they are, which of course they're these large commercial airplanes. They felt that this is nothing small. This has got to be big, but it didn't have a transponder. So that was weird. They didn't know what it was. It was moving at a speed equal to theirs. At least it was at a length that was at least as large as theirs. Nobody said they could make out any wings or anything. These were flights that were landing in Portland. As soon as these flights landed, F-15s were scrambled, and the F-15s couldn't find anything. Whatever it was gone by the time that these F-15 fighters got there. So a great case. He did some great FOIA work. He worked with the FAA to get the audio. So it's an incredible case. It's a really, really good case. So you can find this on the website called it's The Drive, and the section he writes for, which is the defense section, is called The War Zone. And Tyler Rogaway is his name. You can find him on Twitter too. But some really good stuff. I had him on my podcast last time, but those are some great stories out there.
Yeah, I started listening to the podcast. I think I fell asleep. It has nothing to do with you. It was just late at night, but it sounded like it was really good.
It was a lot of fun.
He sounded enthusiastic as well. So, I really like talking to people like outside of, not to offend anyone at all, but kind of like outside of the UFO realm that have had some type of experience. They're always interesting stories and an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you 100%, and it's important, I think, because if we're going to reach broader audiences, and enlist people with expertise who can help, and the type of expertise that Rogaway has, being very familiar with top secret aircraft or our defense capabilities, that's expertise which is vital. And we talked about why he has been reticent to, discuss or do anything with his UFO interests, because of the nature of the field. There's a lot of goofballs out there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're silly goofballs.
Yeah, that's right. We're harmless.
Which is,
I think.
Yeah, we're the harmless type of goofball.
Yeah. Anything else happening?
Yeah, there's other stuff that's kind of cool. This is, I think, a very cool story. The story I posted was from Popular Mechanics. You can find this on the front page of openminds.tv. But there are other stories out there. And this is the idea that they think they might have discovered life on Venus. So this is a really neat story. this ad popped up, but I got some details here. But essentially, of course, they've thought that Venus is too hot and inhospitable to have life. But they've noticed these dark clouds in Venus's atmosphere, and they think that these might be light-absorbing bacteria. So it would kind of be like the ocean, where we have these blooms of bacteria, and similar thing, but in their atmosphere in Venus, that there may be this bacteria living there. So an amazing discovery if they do find out that's what it is. But it's really cool that they're taking this really seriously, that this could be.
Isn't that something?
Maybe
so,
they'll be. Mm-hmm.
So all these contactees that were saying they were, in touch with the Venusians, all these,
Yeah.
They were right.
Who knows? Maybe these bacteria have consciousness, and they even can use telepathy. Who knows?
Yeah.
Sure, we'll find out over time. We're always finding out the universe is much stranger than we expect. But maybe they'll be watching these plumes, and they'll see some kind of large creature come floating up in the clouds and eating the bacteria. Who knows?
Well, wouldn't that be ironic, though? A planet that it has been stated many, many times over the years that there's no way there could be life there. Wouldn't that be ironic if life was found there first?
No kidding, especially with all of the missions and everything, all the focus on Mars.
Yeah.
It would be shocking. It would be really cool if that did happen.
Yeah.
Let's see. There was another couple of things. Tom DeLonge has got his Secret Machines book 2 coming out. Of course, it's fictionalized. Or no, this is... but it's supposed to be based on real stuff. That's kind of interesting. But this is really cool. The Mint in Winnipeg is the Canadian Mint. They are posting a Manitoba UFO encounter coin. They actually already made it, and I guess it's a hit. It's a different kind of shape, and it glows in the dark, but it is in commemoration of the sighting that took place. And Chris Rutkowski, the UFO researcher in Canada, he's been doing some news pieces. So we have some of those. We posted the extended version of an interview with him about this with CTV, Canadian Television News. And so it's kind of cool. This was an event that occurred in the 70s. I can't remember exactly which year. Sorry for that. But essentially, this is a guy who came across a craft and it actually burnt him. He got too close, and he said it took off, and it burnt these marks across his chest. But
one.
So
wow, yeah.
They're commemorating this UFO encounter with this coin, a really cool coin. I was like, I'm gonna get it. It's a $20 coin, but even though they put that monetary value, they charge more for them. I wasn't aware of that, so I was really happy to spend my $20, and it turned out it's actually $140 for the coin. So I'm not sure if I can make that much of an investment yet. My boss did, or John Rayo, the owner of OpenMinds.tv. So I'm excited to get a look at his coin once he gets it. I guess they're going to be shipped out in June.
That was
really cool.
I always think of that as the Falcon Lake incident, and that was back in 1967, by the way.
Yeah, you're right. And you know what? I could be, and this has happened before. Believe it or not, I could be completely wrong in the sighting that they want.
No, that would be the same sighting because the guy had the burn marks on him. That's a Falcon Lake, but it happened in Manitoba.
Yeah, it is Falcon Lake. Yeah, you're right. 67. So that is the one that they're commemorating.
Yeah, that is
cool stuff.
Yeah, that was quite an incident. I would love to do a show on that sometime if there's like a researcher that wrote a book. I don't know. I haven't even looked into it, but that would be good to do a show.
Well, you know what? You'll have to, people can go to openminds.tv right now, and on the front page in our headlines, you'll see the interview with Chris Rutkowski. He might be the person to talk to about that case.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's great. I mean, he's a journalist. He's very credible and grounded in his research, so I'm a big fan of his. But if you go to articles and then you go to look at the daily UFO headlines, you'll see the link for the actual coin story, where you'll be able to also find the link to purchase your own should you wish to do so.
Okay, so is that it for news today?
That's it. Yeah, unless you want some more, I'm sure I can come up with something. There's always lots of exciting stuff going on.
I think it's time to bring on the guest, but I really appreciate it, Alejandro, and we'll be talking to you next week as always.
Yep, you've got a great guest to go to, so you better get to it.
All
right. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you next week.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
You too. See ya.
All right. Our guest, Robert Schroeder, like I said, he was on many years ago at the beginning of the podcast. His book is called Solving the UFO Enigma, How Modern Physics is Revealing the Technology of UFOs. He's recently retired. Well, he's been retired a while after 26 years from Hewlett-Packard, where he was involved in operations and product management. He has degrees in math from Rutgers and University and in aerospace engineering. And anyway, we are going to be talking now to Robert. Welcome to the show again, Robert.
Hi, Martin. Thank you for having me on the show again.
Yes. Last time it was face-to-face in my office when I was down in Massachusetts. I don't know if you remember that.
I remember.
Yeah.
I sure do.
Yeah.
Up in, where was it?
Woburn.
By the mall.
Yeah, Woburn.
Yeah,
yep.
That was it. Right.
Woburn, as they say there, the locals.
Yeah. I'm from New Jersey, so
yeah.
I originally, yeah.
Yeah. For the, I believe I hear a phone ringing. Perhaps that's okay.
You're right.
It'll stop ringing
sorry
eventually.
About that.
Yeah. That's okay. For the person that doesn't know your background, I know you have other science or engineers in your family, but can you kind of give a background? And I remember you telling me you had a sighting when you were young, a real unique sighting, if I remember right. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And I'm glad you mentioned that because I would like to talk about that a little too. And but first, let me give you a little bit of my background. I come from New Jersey, as I just mentioned, and I grew up in Teaneck, New Jersey, which is a little town. Well, not that little. It's physically it's not too big, but population-wise, it has about 50,000 people. So compared to the town I live in now, which is physically much bigger, but has a much smaller population. But we were a suburb of New York City. And so I grew up there in the 50s and 60s, and probably sometime in the 80s, I came up to this part of the country to work for a computer company. Originally, it was Digital Equipment Corporation, which I'm sure many of the local people here remember. But eventually, Digital was swallowed by Hewlett-Packard. So at the end of the day, I ended up retiring from Hewlett-Packard after 26, 27 years. And that was a great company to work for. One of the best reasons to work for Hewlett-Packard. I had trips out to California.
Oh, yeah.
In the middle of the winter. and for those of us in Massachusetts, you can really appreciate that, you know.
Yes.
But anyway, I come from a family of scientists and engineers. My dad was a chemist, and he graduated from MIT, so I have that kind of a background. I have a degree in math from Rutgers. My daughter works now down in the D.C. area, and she's a structural engineer. You know, probably a bit unusual for a woman, but that's what she does. And my wife is a math teacher. I met a high school math teacher. I met her in abstract algebra at Rutgers. So that if that gives you an idea of who I am, you know. And I love science. Even though I ended up in the business world, I worked, you know, for a computer company there, and I was actually in finance and operations and product management. But my heart was always with science. And physics in particular. I just love it. You know, I'm the kind of guy that I go to bookstores and I live here in Massachusetts, and I'll go to the Harvard Coop. Their big, their big bookstore there. You know about that, Martin?
Yep.
Yeah, and it's gigantic, and there are just literally thousands of books on science and stuff. And my wife gets a little upset, but I could spend the entire day there, and looking through the books. You'll only let me buy so many per trip, otherwise would be buried, But so anyway, I've been you sent me an email before the show that one of your listeners, I think his name was Tom, had asked a couple of questions, and how did I end up with an interest in physics and stuff, even though I worked in the business world. Well, actually, I originally wanted to work for NASA, but by the time I graduated from college in 1972, at that time, there was a lot of budgetary problems, and they were cutting back on the NASA budget. So I ended up switching to a business major. I ended up getting an MBA, and so I stayed in Rutgers for 2 more years. And that worked out great because I did okay, nice retirement and all that stuff. But I missed science, and all through the years, when time allowed, I would read on physics and stuff like that. And just to give you an idea of what I do when I read about physics, I love the general interest books, and I definitely enjoy those. But I also am interested in the math and physics. So I've been for the last year and a half, I've been studying the math of general relativity, tensor math, and all that stuff, and I've also kind of looked at quantum mechanics. I derived Schrodinger's equation, which is one of the key equations of general relativity. But in fact, I forgot to mention, I wrote a book, Solving the UFO Enigma, How Modern Physics is Revealing the Technology of UFOs. And in that book, for anybody who's interested, they can see how I derived the key wave equation of quantum mechanics. And it's kind of fun. Don't be afraid of it. I tell people, even if you don't have a math background, you can figure it out. In the back of the book, I show basic calculus, how to do it. I show vector calculus and things like that too. So that's one thing I really believe in, that people should not be afraid of the math and the physics. In the back of the book, in Appendix A, I don't know if Martin is showing it on the video here. You can kind of see it. In Appendix, you're looking at the Schrodinger equation derivation there, and it's not as bad as you might think. It takes a little bit of you've got to kind of go through the if you don't have a background in math, you want to go to the Appendix A and look at that, and then you can flip back to the Schrodinger equation. And but I hope that gives people an idea of where I come from and my background. I love science, and I have so much fun. Oh, by the way, another thing I forgot to mention. After I retired, I started doing substitute teaching at a middle school and high schools and stuff. And I have so much fun with the kids. I try to inspire them to get into math and science, and for a very good reason, I believe, because many people may not be aware of this, but only about 6 or 7% of American college students go into engineering, and engineering and science. In contrast, in China, which is certainly one of our big competitors today, it's something like 40%.
Huh.
Isn't that incredible?
That's amazing.
It's 6-7 times greater,
Wow.
And so if we don't watch out, we're going to lose our shirts,
Mm-hmm.
And technology is so critical.
Not only that, but you think of the population of China compared to the U.S., and then you do the math, how many people that is compared, never mind percentage, but the amount of people. And you're going to get some real smart people in there. It's just bound to happen statistically.
Yep, I totally agree. And we have really got to be kind of proactive about this. But anyway, that's so when I'm in middle school and the high school, I love telling I love inspiring the kids and telling them about, special relativity, general relativity, and stuff like that. And I've come up with some kind of simple ways to show them how it works, so they can actually see how the curvature of space-time creates what we call gravity. And then I do another example that shows that anybody can come up with the equations of special relativity. If you know the Pythagorean theorem, you can do it on your own, and it's that easy, And people are unnecessarily afraid of math and science, and they shouldn't be. But anyway, so I want to also mention about the UFO sighting that I had.
Yeah.
This was way back, way back. It was November 1957, and for people who have really followed the UFO experience over the years here, they will be aware that 1957 was one of those times when there was a gigantic UFO wave around the world, but particularly in the United States. And at the time I was only about 10 years old, and of course I don't think I was reading the papers back then. I think I was out playing baseball. But but one day in 1957, but I did love science even then as a kid. My dad used to buy us chemistry sets and things like that, and my grandfather was an engineer, so because of that kind of history and background, it's just sort of in my blood, And so one day about 5 o'clock in the afternoon in November, so the sun was already beginning to go down, but you could still see it. It was still bright daylight, and I looked up in the sky, and we lived about 2 or 3 miles west of New York City, Manhattan, the George Washington Bridge, if for people that know that part of the country, so I looked up. And I looked at the peak of the roof of our house. We had a big 2-story house. I come from a big family, so we needed a big house. I have 5 brothers and sisters, and yeah, I know. So, but anyway, what happened was I was out there, and I don't know why I was out there, but I used to love to look up at the Boeing 707 was just coming out, and so you could see these jets going across the sky, and I used to love to go up there and go out and look at them. And I looked up, and I saw this cylindrical-shaped object coming over the roof of our house. But it was way up there, probably about 5,000 feet, and it was heading straight toward New York City. And it was exactly the shape of a cigarette. That's the best way I can describe it. And it was golden color. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm thinking, this is really weird, because Boeing 707s had tapered front and back. The nose was tapered and the tail was tapered, and you could see the wings usually. Now, of course, anybody it was a perfectly clear blue sky, and I've noticed sometimes when a plane tilts its wings a certain way, you can see the fuselage, but you can't really see the wings. And so they're there, but you don't really see them. And so I thought, well, maybe that's what it is. And maybe it's just an optical illusion about the blunt front and the blunt back. I mean, when I say shaped like a cigarette, I mean exactly like a cigarette. And then as it continued, it's a majestic, that's the only way I can describe it, a majestic movement across the sky heading east toward New York City. And as I mentioned, we were about 2 or 3 miles west of Manhattan. I noticed there was a round object following in tandem behind this thing. And it was maybe one length of the cigarette behind it. And the cigarette, by the way, was long axis was pointing toward New York, and it was going in the direction of travel. And so anyway, they were both moving along together, and the round object was no wider than the narrow width of the longer cylinder. And so I was amazed. I could not believe what I was seeing. And here's this thing, and it's and then it finally headed toward the trees at the other end of our yard. And at that point I said, oh my gosh, I got to tell my brothers and sisters. So I ran inside to get them, and I got one of my brothers to come out, and he took a look, and he saw it just as it disappeared. But it was really strange. But now I got to tell you the connection to the UFO phenomenon. It was November 1957, and anybody who's studied the UFO phenomenon over the years knows that in early November, there was a big UFO case down in Levelland, Texas. Does that ring a bell?
It doesn't to me. No.
Oh, it doesn't.
I'm sorry. I should have known of that one, but I just can't recall it.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Well, briefly, what happened down there, and Dr. J. Allen Hynek investigated, these objects came down. There was about 7 or 8 sightings around this town, and people's trucks were being stopped, cars being stopped, when these egg-shaped objects would land on the road, a couple hundred feet in front of a car, and the car's engine would stop, a very typical characteristic of UFO close encounters. And as Dr. Hynek points out many times in his books, so it's very interesting that I saw this thing in November too. I think that's significant. And so anyway, years later, as a teenager, I took a book out of the Teaneck Public Library by Donald Kehoe, Major Donald Kehoe, and again, many people with a background in the UFO field know that Donald Kehoe was one of the guys that became, even though he was an Air Force guy, I think, was he Project Blue Book? I can't remember.
I don't think so. Whatever. No, he was the first.
Yeah.
First, Lee Spiegel and I were just talking about him last night. He was basically the first government whistleblower on UFOs, but he was a former Air Force.
And well, one of his books that I was reading in sometime in the 1960s, it talked about this sighting over in France, that where this guy was walking his dog early in the morning, and he looked up in the sky, and he saw this gigantic cylinder, and it was like 2 a.m. in the morning or something, and he said it was like a metallic cylinder. It was tilted at a 45-degree angle. And as he watched it, he was wondering what the heck it was. He said this thing, he compared it to the clouds, and he kind of had an idea of how big the clouds were. And he said this thing easily had to be a half-mile long. And so now I'm really interested as I read this story, because it sounded like the cylinder that I saw, and he described it as blunt on the ends and looking pretty much like a cigarette. And then here's the key to the whole thing. He said on the bottom end of this thing suddenly saw a flash of light, and a disc-shaped object came out, swirled around the cylinder a couple times, shot off in one direction of the compass. A second one came out, shot off in another direction, until 6 or 7 had come out and disappeared.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And I realized what I had seen back in 1957 was one of these typical motherships, and that was just one of the UFOs, which must be what I guess you could call scout ships that must be stacked up like plates on the inside of the mothership, and I finally realized that's what it was, and that revelation really excited me, because I suddenly realized there was something to this phenomenon. This was something real, and so anyway, over the years, as time permitted, I've been studying the UFO phenomenon, and of course my love of science too. I've tried to apply many times over the years. I kept wondering if different ideas could explain it. You've probably heard of the Alcubierre warp drive, Miguel Alcubierre.
Yep.
And I looked at that back in the 90s. before that, there was that guy out in California, and I forget his name, Kip Thorne, the physicist, Kip Thorne, and he discussed the idea of wormholes and the idea of having negative energy to hold the wormhole open that would allow craft to travel between the stars. And so there were a number of these ideas floating around, but I never was totally sure of them. And eventually Miguel Alcubierre came out and said that his idea probably wouldn't work because the energy requirements were way too great. And Kip Thorne pointed out that the problem with the wormhole idea is that the idea of negative energy and a wormhole, trying to get a wormhole to go to, you can't direct the wormhole. You basically have to find one and then go into it. And the dangers are tremendous. I just suddenly realized, Martin, I've kind of taken off here without, you're the host.
Oh, no. This is all interesting. By the way, I have a question involving Ray Stanford coming up here in a second that was sent to me, and he just emailed me to correct me, and I looked it up at the same time. Kehoe was actually a Marine major. He was a aviator too. Oh. Yeah.
Okay.
And I was the one that said he was Air Force, so that was wrong. So here's a question with Ray, and by the way, later on we'll take calls. Anyone wants to call in, we will be taking calls right after, let's see, about a half hour from now. Okay. So this person wanted to know, have you ever spoken with Ray Stanford regarding propulsion ideas? Ray seems to have some very complex understanding or theories regarding propulsion. It would be neat to see how both ideas compare. Have you and Ray ever discussed this?
Before the show, I knew that question was going to be coming, and I only had about 10 or 15 minutes, but I quickly looked up on the internet, and I couldn't find much on Ray Stanford, and I couldn't find much about his theories. In fact, actually nothing. So I don't really know. I've definitely heard of him. I've heard him mentioned a few other times. Yeah. I just haven't been able to find out much about his ideas. The only place that I can think of, and Ray may call in. He's called in a number of times. But the only place I can think that is published would be in Chris Lambright's book, X Descending. His propulsion theory is laid out very well in that, with images and everything. It's very interesting. And, Ray may call in later, in the half hour. But we have to talk about your theories, how you came up with it. And I remember I was kind of baffled, and you didn't go too sciencey, but you had to get a little bit into math and a little bit on how things work. Let's can start at the beginning or anywhere. Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds great, Martin. And so the first thing I want to address is the UFO evidence. And I know a lot of people are skeptical about UFOs, but they really shouldn't be.
I don't think the ones that listen to this show, I don't believe they are. I believe there are some, but for the most part, I have people that are interested. We have a lot of people that are very good, healthy skeptics, but still are interested, like you were all the years.
Yes, and you may have heard of Skeptical Inquirer.
Oh yeah,
and Robert Schroeder.
Yeah,
and I actually saw him down in Arizona at the International UFO Congress, and I tried to get him to come over to my table, but I couldn't get him to come over. It was too bad. I always want those guys to get a fair hearing, so I don't really have any problem with skeptics. But my attitude is that now that Kepler, the Kepler telescope, and wait, is it the Kepler or whichever? Oh no, Kepler's going up. That's the new one.
No, Kepler's the one that found the
Kepler's
planets.
Up there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And James Webb is the one that.
The James Webb.
Yeah, that's going up.
Thank you, Martin. Yep. The James Webb is going up, I think, this year. But anyway, the Kepler and some other methods that they've been using. They've found about 4,000 extrasolar planets out there, and I think they even found one, the TRAPPIST system, TRAPPIST, that has like 8 or 9, 7 or 8 planets, many of them Earth-sized, and they think 2 or 3 appear to be in the habitable zone of the TRAPPIST system. I don't know if how many people have heard about that, but the fact that the methods that they're using now are kind of biasing the data toward planets that are closer to their parent star. And for example, the TRAPPIST system is a dwarf star, a red dwarf, and so those planets are relatively close. And of course, the reason for that is what they're looking for is when the planet eclipses the star and there's a slight change in the light, then they know that the planet is there. Or there's a wobble in the star's orbit because of the planets tugging it. And so these are the different things. But of course, a planet that's closer to its parent star is going to create more of a wobble. And so the methods that they're using right now are not really designed to find solar systems like ours, where the planets are spread out and it's a G star, and of course 99% of the stars out there, the planets going around them won't be in directly in our plane so that we can see the planets against that star. It's only about 1% that happen to be eclipsing their stars that are at the right angle, the orbits of their planets. And so the reason I mention that is because the fact that just by these relatively primitive methods, they've already found 4,000 planets in a decade or two, tells you that they are just everywhere. And so, and before this, they really didn't know. It was pure speculation, the Drake equation. And so now they know. And the odds are that there are just literally billions, trillions of planets out there. And so I think the possibility of other Earths with intelligent life are just phenomenal. I think they're absolutely overwhelming. And so anyway, so what I want to get to is the next question is, if there is life out there, have some of these more advanced civilizations than ours, have they been able to figure out how to get to planet Earth? And I think they have. And the reason I say that is because of the UFO evidence, not just my sighting, but sightings by thousands and thousands of people, by very credible witnesses like airline pilots, professors, and things like that, people like that. And so I want to point out the evidence from the accumulated evidence we have of UFOs and their characteristics, because that's critical. So one of the things that's really interesting about UFOs is their rapid accelerations. This has been reported time and time again. I remember there was I think it was a General Mills. I know they're a cereal company, but they operate some atmospheric research labs too. And they were doing some work down, I think, in New Mexico or someplace like that. And they had some balloons up there that they were observing through a theodolite. And one day they saw a UFO circling one of their balloons, and they were watching it, and they could see it clearly, and they said it was a typical disc-shaped UFO. And then to their amazement, the thing took off. They estimated, because they were able to track it, at over 100 Gs, 100 times the force of gravity, the acceleration. This is unbelievable. And so the best that a human pilot can do is about 10 Gs in our jet fighters, and even then it takes a G suit and special training and stuff, and that's about the best they can do. So that's an important characteristic of UFOs, this phenomenal acceleration. And we have to pay attention to these characteristics if we're going to understand their technology. And so that's one thing that's very important. Now, in order for an object, any kind of object, to accelerate fast, it has to overcome inertia, and inertia is nothing more than the resistance to acceleration. And there's a number of theories out there on where inertia comes from, but one of the guys that way back many years ago, back at in the turn of the previous century, around 1900 or sometime in that era, an Austrian physicist by the name of Ernst Mach came up with Mach's principle, and his idea was that inertia is due to the mass of the entire universe, so pulling on any particular object when it tries to accelerate, and so he meant when you look up at the sky at night, all those stars out there, all those galaxies and everything like that, billions and billions of light years away, are all tugging on whatever object it is in our vicinity that tries to accelerate, which is kind of an amazing theory. And Einstein wanted to incorporate Mach's principle into his general theory of relativity, and he wasn't really sure whether he did or not. But anyway, so there's a number of people that have looked at this over the years, but the key thing I'm really trying to get at is that inertia, the greater the mass of an object, the greater the inertia, so the harder it is to accelerate. And this is very important to what we're going to get to later. And so somehow, and now, how much do these UFOs weigh? Well, Ted Phillips of MUFON, who used to work for Dr. J. Allen Hynek, actually went out and did a multi-year study on this, and he examined landing sites where UFOs had come down and looked at the indentations in the ground. I think there was one in France where it landed on railroad ties and left deep indentations in the railroad ties. And so he concluded that these objects, and he said, the witnesses reported that the object came down and then very gently settled down. So the indentations don't appear to be from momentum, the object coming in fast and leaving a bigger indentation. So they appear to be just from the weight of the UFO itself after it turned off its whatever engines it has. And but he ended up coming up with a figure between 10 and 30 tons, 10 tons to 30 tons for the typical disc shape and egg shaped and stuff like that. Yes, you got it, Martin. It's this is,
and just getting you do hear of impressions that are very deep on these landings. Like for instance, the egg shaped one at Socorro left really deep marks in the ground.
That's right, and that's right. And Dr. J. Allen Hynek examined that landing site. So that was a very interesting one because a police officer is generally going to be very credible, and I think there was possibly other witnesses who observed the thing at a distance. And but anyway, the reason I mention this is because somehow these UFOs, which appear to be in the 10 to 30 ton range, have phenomenal acceleration, which tells you that something really interesting is going on here. And for them to accelerate an object with great mass like that. You can think of like a cannonball. It takes tremendous force to shoot a cannonball, and you can actually see the cannonball, as it travels. If you're at a particular angle, you can see it. But a rifle bullet, which has very little mass, when you shoot it out of a rifle, you can't see it. It's just so fast, and it can accelerate a lot faster than a cannonball. And I've actually seen this. This is something it amazed me. I was in Vietnam back in 67, 68, and in the U.S. Army, and the battleship New Jersey, the state from where I come from, and was shooting at targets beyond where we were, and we were, we were just we could hear the noise of the shells, the ones that had already passed us, because they're going pretty fast. and and so, but we happened to be looking up, and we saw these silver flashes in the sky, and I realized we were looking at the shells being lobbed by the New Jersey. And so that tells you an object with a lot of mass can't go very fast, but it does carry a lot of punch because of its mass.
Right.
And of course the explosives. But anyway, that's just an example of what I mean by inertia and mass, the relationship there. So that's one of the other important characteristics. And then another very important characteristic of UFOs is their ability to levitate, and that's very interesting too. And typically levitate without making too much noise, although sometimes they hear a humming or generator noise. And so I'd have to say that they do make some noise.
Some of them do, but a lot of times you do hear of this silence. That's the one you hear almost more often.
Yes, that's exactly correct, and I find that pretty amazing too.
Me too.
So, but then another characteristic which I really find interesting is that these a number of people over the years, pilots, have seen these UFOs become partially transparent and then totally disappear. And one of the best cases was Captain Charles Duboc, Air France, and I don't remember the date, maybe 1994, something like that. But he was approaching Paris in a Boeing 747, and he observed about 1,000-foot diameter red disk about 20 miles ahead of him. And this red disk, he said, it was picked up on their airborne radar as well as 2 ground radars, a military and civilian. And as they watched this object, it became partially transparent, and then they finally could see straight through it, and it finally totally disappeared. But isn't that? I find that amazing. And then another guy up in Canada, and this was more recent, I think maybe 2014, 2015, observed a cylindrical-shaped UFO that was below him as he was coming in for a landing, and he saw it moving above this highway. And then as the UFO maybe apparently, for some reason, it suddenly became partially transparent and then totally disappeared right in front of his eyes. And he said the weird thing was he could see the road right through the object, but still see the outline of the object, and then it disappeared.
Wow.
And there's a number of other cases. There was a guy, and I can't remember his name, Chichester, Francis Chichester. You've probably never heard of him. He was one of the pioneers in aviation pioneer, and way back in, I believe, the 1920s, way back in the 1920s. You know what? The wind is blowing here, and I heard this noise by the door. But this guy, he was flying what's called a Gypsy Moth aircraft, which is a biplane. So this wasn't exactly fast, but he saw and in those days they didn't call them UFOs in the 1920s, but he observed this disc-shaped object with a cupola on the top, and he said what amazed him was, as he was watching it, he said it was maybe a mile out ahead of him, and as he's approaching it, and it was off to one side a little bit, he said the thing became partially transparent, and then it totally disappeared. And then where the object had been, a cloud formed in exactly the shape of the UFO. And then it dissipated in the breeze.
Wow.
But then as he looked over on the right, he saw another flash of light, and the object reappeared over there. He said it seemed like it was splitting the sky and reappearing. And it moved, he said, maybe a mile off to one side. And and he was amazed. It dawned on me when I read the story that gypsy moths, in those days the planes couldn't fly too high, so they were, and he was not at a great altitude. I don't know his exact altitude, but I know he wasn't way up 40,000 feet or anything. And so I realized that at that height of the atmosphere, there was be a lot of moisture, because lower down you are, the more moisture. That's part of the reason jets, when they fly way up high, they get away from a lot of the turbulence and storm clouds and stuff in the lower atmosphere. That's why they fly up there, and it's thinner and they can go faster. And of course, where the atmosphere is moist, if you create a sudden vacuum, you end up with a cloud. That's how clouds form. As they go up to the lower pressure, higher up in the in the sky, that's why clouds form up there. It ends up creating a cloud. So anyway, so that made me realize that there's something. So that was the third case, but there's a number of others as well. But I just mentioned those three for our purposes here. And there's a few other characteristics of UFOs, like they have one very important one is that they're often seen to rotate, and that's very important as well. And another characteristic is they seem to glow. They often see a glow around UFOs, and that's of interest too.
That's what I actually, when I had my sighting, it had like a bluish glow over it. You know,
okay.
It was like twilight, like 8 o'clock in the evening, so it wasn't quite dark, and it went over me. There were no lights on it, but it was sort of like I would say a silvery looking disc, but it had the overall had like a hue of blue, like a light blue glow over the whole thing.
Oh, wow. And what year do you remember,
2006.
Martin? Oh, wow.
And that was in Monterey area, California, the Carmel Valley. Yeah.
Oh, you were lucky to be out there.
Yeah.
I love California.
Yes, yeah, it was very nice.
And by the way, when was that Chicago O'Hare sighting?
God, I want to say it was 2008
or 7.
I was 2007. I think it was 2007. Gate C-17. I remember that. I will look as we're talking. That is another that case, but that left a circle in the cloud.
Yes, punched a hole.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
I think it was.
The reason I asked.
Yeah. 2000. That was 2006 actually as well.
See, there you go.
Yeah.
And that's what I was looking for. And you see, this is one of the things that people who are researching UFOs need to examine. The fact that a lot of these UFO sightings, there's connections. They occur in the same year, same month, same season and stuff. So in other words, 57, you saw a slew of sightings. 59, there were a whole bunch. In the early 60s, there was a whole bunch. There were these waves at different times. And see how I quickly connected your sighting to the one up at O'Hare.
Yeah,
wow. And
yeah.
This is the kind of stuff we people who look at the UFO phenomenon need to pay attention to, because that corroborates, it tends to confirm your sighting, because these things were being seen elsewhere. And so anyway, so now I think I'll jump right into the physics, because I've kind of given the background we need. And so here it is. And because I suddenly realized we only have till 10 o'clock.
Yeah, and then we're going to be taking calls too, so.
So I better go fast.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
And okay. So anyway, as people may be aware, the two pillars of modern physics are quantum mechanics and general relativity. And general relativity deals with the world of the very large, planets, stars, solar systems, galaxies, the universe as a whole. And quantum mechanics deals with the world of the very small, subatomic particles, atoms, things like that, quarks and protons, neutrons, electrons, and things. And so and now it turns out that modern science, one of the big things in modern science has been to come up with a theory that unites all of the theories that are out there, and it's basically called the TOE theory of everything,
Right.
and the big toe, so it's easy to remember. And but anyway, so general relativity it came out in 1915, and then the quantum theory, Max Planck came out with with his ideas on the quanta back then, and he and Einstein worked on that. And then by the mid-1920s, they had come up with all the basic rules and formulas of quantum mechanics, and then they later on they refined that much more in the years after that. But anyway, one of the big things, kind of the holy grail of modern physics, has been to try to unite the quantum theory with general relativity, and the key thing that's going on. And I do need to kind of mention a little bit of physics here, which is very important. We do need to know the quantum area of physics, the structure of matter, and the forces that act on matter. So basically, everything is made up of either matter particles or force particles acting on the stage of space-time, interacting on the stage of space-time. And that's it. That's the whole universe. We have space-time, we have matter particles, we have force particles. And it gets easier than that. It turns out that there really are only a few primary matter particles. There are quarks and there are leptons, and then and that's it. Those are the two basic families of matter particles, and the quarks make up the protons and neutrons and mesons and particles like that. But most people are aware of protons and neutrons in an atom, and leptons include like an electron and neutrinos, and that's it. There's only really a few basic matter particles in the universe. That's it. But they combine in many, many different ways, and I won't go into too much detail on that because I don't want to confuse the listenership, and it's not all that critical. There's only really two types of quarks, an up quark and a down quark, that make up 99% of all the matter in the universe. And there's a few other types of quarks out there, but they are higher energy versions of the two basic ones. And so there's an up quark, a down quark, an electron, and neutrinos, and that's all there is to the four fundamental basic matter particles that make up everything. And so those are the matter particles, and on the force particles, again, there's only four. Four types of force particles. There's four basic types of forces. There's the strong nuclear force, which acts only inside the nucleus, and it holds the nuclei together. And there's the weak nuclear force, which is responsible for radioactivity. And I'm going to be done with this real quick. I'm sorry I have to go into this detail, but it's important to the overall thing. And then there's electromagnetism, which everybody is familiar with. Photons carry the electromagnetic force. And then there's gravity, which we are all very familiar with, because when we have to get up in the morning to go to work, we all fight gravity until our first cup of coffee. And so anyway, those are the four fundamental forces of nature. And there is a fifth, a background field called the Higgs field, but I'll get to that in a second. But anyway, the strong nuclear force consists of gluons that exchange the strong nuclear force. The weak nuclear force is W plus W minus Z neutral. Electromagnetism is carried by the photon, and gravity. And here's where we're getting into important stuff. They've never seen this particle, but it's called the graviton, and that's the particle that is believed to carry the gravity force. So the interesting thing is, in physics, what they want to do is try to unite these forces. They have had success, Martin, with the three non-gravity forces, with the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and electromagnetism. And they've made some serious headway there. For example, they've been able to unite electromagnetism with the weak nuclear force, and that's called the electroweak force. And so that's a major feather in the cap of physics, modern physics. And they are working on theories that unite the strong nuclear force with the electroweak force, and that looks like they've been working on that. And then, of course, electromagnetism, it was once thought the electric and magnetic forces were separate, but James Clerk Maxwell united them in his Maxwell's theories. So they've made significant progress in the non-gravity forces, but so far they have not been able to unite gravity with the other three non-gravity forces. And so the question is, why not? And here's where it gets really interesting, and this leads to an explanation of the UFO phenomenon, and you'll see why. Okay, here's where it gets very exciting. Gravity, it turns out, the gravity interaction is much, much weaker than the interaction of the other non-gravity forces. And the other forces are relatively close to each other in terms of interaction strength. So, for example, the electromagnetic force compared to gravity is 10 to the 36 power stronger than gravity.
Wow.
And isn't that incredible?
That's 36 zeros, right?
Exactly right. 36 zeros after the one, one followed by 36 zeros. I mean, it's absolutely staggering. Wow. It's I don't even know what they call it, a Googleplex or whatever. And I mean, it's stunning. And the same is true of the other forces of nature. They too are tremendously have strong interaction strength compared to gravity. So that appears to be the reason why they can't unite the non-gravity forces with gravity, because they can't really get a handle on the quantum aspects of gravity because of its obvious weakness. And in fact, this problem, this discrepancy in strength between the gravitational force and the non-gravity forces is so important in physics and such a big problem that it actually has a name. It's called the hierarchy problem. And so everybody listening should pay attention to that problem in physics, the hierarchy problem, and because that, I also believe, is going to be the key to solving the UFO phenomenon, and we're going to get to that real quick here. And so anyway, over the years, they've been developing other theories to try to bring things together. And people have probably heard of string theory. Martin, I don't know if you've heard of that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, string theory.
Yeah.
And the whole idea behind string theory is that it was once thought that the subatomic particles were infinitesimally tiny, dimensionless points. And but now... but sometime, I can't even remember when, I think it might have been back in the 70s or something, they began to realize that the subatomic particles may not be dimensionless points, but they might be little wiggling strings. And it was an Italian physicist who first noticed it, and then a bunch of other physicists around the world came up with theories to explain why he saw some peculiar math in some of the accelerator experiments they were doing over in Switzerland. And particle accelerators where they smash subatomic particles together. So anyway, they now believe that the subatomic particles are made up of little tiny wiggling strings, and over the years, different theories have been developed. But one of the key ones is the idea that the string is open, has two open ends, and so and then along with this theory comes other ideas that have to be part of string theory because they came along with it. And one of the exciting ones is the idea of extra dimensions. And this is the one that I believe also plays a literally critical role in the UFO phenomenon, as we will see. And but still, they couldn't yet unite gravity with the non-gravity forces, even with string theory. But then along came, right around the early 2000s, a new theory by a Harvard physicist that came up with an explanation for the hierarchy problem and what it's all about, and potentially how to unify the forces of nature. And now everybody has to pay attention, because this, I believe, it may end up pointing to how UFOs work. And so this Harvard physicist, along with another physicist from Johns Hopkins University, came up with the idea that, actually, it was part of membrane theory, which is part of string theory. But they used string theory to develop an explanation of the hierarchy problem, the weakness of gravity. And they came up with this idea that maybe the universe consists of two membranes that are floating parallel to each other, and we live on one of those membranes, and that membrane is the four-dimensional universe that we're used to. And when you go outside and look up in the sky, it's all part of that four-dimensional universe. And it turns out that string theory proposes that there are actually, and people may be aware that we live in a four-dimensional universe. Physics historically has been based on 4 dimensions, 3 of space and 1 of time. But string theory proposes that we may live in up to as many as 11 dimensions. Mm-hmm. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah,
11
amazing.
Dimensions.
Yeah. The brains,
it turns out,
right?
Brains are what they. I'll tell you about that in a second. So they think that that 6 of those 11 dimensions are curled up at every point in space-time, so they don't play a direct role in what we're going to be talking about tonight. But that still leaves, because 4 plus 7 makes 11, that still leaves 1 extra larger dimension. So that means instead of 4 large dimensions, 3 of space and 1 of time, Minkowski was the guy who came up with the idea that time should be treated as a spatial dimension. And so that means that there are 5 dimensions, 4 of space and 1 of time. And so this Harvard people, the theory that they came up with was that there would be, the idea they came up with is that there are 2 membranes floating side by side in the larger 5-dimensional universe. And so we live on one of these 4-dimensional membranes, and the other parallel membrane is 4-dimensional as well. But in between, and both of these membranes are floating in a larger 5-dimensional universe. And the theory they came up with, called warped geometry, proposes that that the gravitons that carry the gravitational force, unlike all the other particles in that I just mentioned, like the photon and the quark and the electron and stuff like that, the graviton is different. All the other particles have 2 open ends, which this theory proposes the 2 open ends are stuck on the membrane that we live on, which is referred to in their theory as the weak membrane, WEAK. And then the other membrane is referred to as the Planck membrane, and it is warped in such a way that it has tremendously strong gravitational pull, and so here's the exciting thing. It turns out that the only particle in our universe that is not an open-ended string that is with its two ends stuck on our membrane. What that means is that the photon, for example, the force particle that carries electromagnetic force, can travel only on our four-dimensional membrane. So that means that with our eyes, which we need to see, the photons hit the retina at the back of our eye. We cannot see that fifth dimension because our photons are stuck on our membrane and can't travel into that five-dimensional area, which they refer to as the bulk, B-U-L-K. But the graviton is the one exception to the rule. Instead of being an open-ended string, it's believed to be a closed loop, a closed string. And that means it's not stuck in our membrane. And that explains the hierarchy problem. What these physicists believe is that the vast majority of gravitons in the overall universe are attracted to the other Planck membrane. And so what that means is that what's left on our in our membrane is only a tiny percentage of the total number of gravitons that are actually out there in the universe. And that would explain why gravity is so weak in our universe, our four-dimensional weak membrane that they call it. Okay.
Would this also, does this theory explain the dark matter by chance?
Oh, that's a great question. In fact, it could easily. The idea that the other, that the other dimensions exist does suggest that could explain the matter that we don't see, because that matter is exerting its force, its gravitational force through gravitons, and so we are experiencing it, but we can't see it because the photons that we need to see with, they cannot penetrate that bulk. So that's in fact, I've had that question many times before, and I've pointed that out, that that would explain why astronomers cannot locate this missing matter, because it's beyond our telescopes. We can't see it. It's in the other dimensions. But going back to the idea, the hierarchy problem appears to be solved by the fact that all these gravitons are much closer. They all want to go toward the gravity brane, the Planck membrane, the other parallel membrane. So what happens is, according to this theory, the deeper you go into the bulk, the stronger gravity gets until it reaches its maximum strength right at the surface of the Planck membrane, and it goes up by a factor of 10 to the 16 power, and so the second I saw this theory, Martin, I realized that could explain how UFOs get to planet Earth quickly. Here's how. And this is the key to the whole thing. General relativity says where gravity is strong, distances shrink. And so if you could make a spaceship that could leave our membrane and go into the bulk, then you could potentially travel to other stars. And you don't need enormous amounts of energy to warp space-time, because Mother Nature has already warped it for you. Do you see? That was the problem with the Alcubierre warp theory. So here's the exciting part. I did a quick calculation, and I realized if it goes up by 10 to the 16 power, Alpha Centauri is 25 trillion miles from planet Earth, and it occurred to me that I could calculate how much the distance would shrink by how far you go into the bulk. So because it goes up exponentially. So I did a quick calculation, and I determined that you only have to go into this bulk, this space between the membranes, to where gravity gets to only 1/10,000th of its maximum strength. Okay, and when you get just to that point, the distance between Alpha Centauri and planet Earth shrinks from 25 trillion miles to just 25 miles. You could jump into your car and drive to Alpha Centauri in half an hour, depending on the speed limit in the bulk. and the traffic and the galactic police. And isn't that incredible? And that's what I think these UFOs are doing. And I think that's why, remember earlier I had emphasized the disappearing UFOs? I believe they're just literally pulling themselves off our membrane, going partway into the bulk and traveling a little ways here and there, and they can shorten the distance. And isn't that, that's what I think they're doing.
Well, what about the 100 Gs?
I'm glad you asked that question, because that comes next. And that's and now the question is, how do these guys how do UFOs levitate, because that's related to the Gs, and how do they get into the bulk and accelerate at blinding speeds? Well, I think this is how they do it. If these extra dimensions exist, they are looking for these extra dimensions at the Large Hadron Collider particle accelerator over in Geneva, Switzerland. And if they do find these extra dimensions, the signal that they will get will be the existence of particles that can only exist if extra dimensions exist. And these are referred to as Kaluza-Klein particles, and shortened, abbreviated as KK particles, named after a couple of physicists. Theodor Kaluza lived in Königsberg, Germany, and the other guy, Klein, Oscar Klein, I think that was his name, lived in Sweden, I think. And these guys came up with this idea of extra dimensions way back then, but at that time they didn't know about string theory, so the idea of extra dimensions has been around in the scientific community before, but now it's backed up by pretty good science so far, although it hasn't been proved yet. But anyway, the interesting thing about these KK particles, once they produce them at the Large Hadron Collider particle accelerator over in Geneva, Switzerland, they will know they produce them because they're going to disappear very quickly into the bulk, because their home is in the bulk. That's where they want to be. And just like E.T., the movie Extraterrestrial, he wanted to go home. Yeah. Well, the KK particles want to go home too. So I thought, hey, wait a minute. If that's the case, maybe if the UFO could shroud itself in these KK particles, they would pull it off into the bulk. And so that's how they may do it. And then I realized something else. These different types of KK particles, and the KK exist, or are believed to exist, and if the extra dimensions are real, the KK particles, when you produce enough of them, they will produce micro black holes. Okay, now what's interesting about a micro black hole is this: a micro black hole can swallow particles that are even those going at the speed of light. And it doesn't actually swallow them. What it actually does is they end up, a light ray would actually end up in a tight orbit around a micro black hole. It just couldn't escape that orbit. The space-time is so crunched there that it's stuck in an orbit there. But it's effectively as if the photon has been swallowed, and that's why they call them black holes, because light disappears, and so light can't escape from a black hole. But by the same token, gravitons, which also go at the speed of light, they're massless particles, they too cannot escape a black hole. So they too end up being swallowed by a black hole. And it dawned on me that, that's maybe what these UFOs are doing. What they're doing is what they do is there, and now remember, on our 4D membrane, the weak membrane, our universe, the amount of gravitons per square meter is tiny compared to further into the bulk. It's very, very small. So what these UFOs may be doing, and this is what I think they're doing, is they're creating these micro black holes that swallow gravitons. So then, as far as the Earth is concerned, it doesn't see a 20-ton UFO. It sees a UFO that weighs maybe the weight of a bullet. Do you see?
Wow.
And then that explains how they overcome inertia. As far as the Earth is concerned, and as far as Mach's principle is concerned, the larger universe, it doesn't. Mach's principle, the inertial force, does not see a 20-ton UFO. It only sees something that they reduce to some small weight, maybe a pound or 6 ounces or whatever, and then what ends up happening is they can accelerate like a bullet in 100 Gs, and that's how they're doing it. And I think that's exactly what they're doing. And since in Einstein, the key to Einstein's general relativity, at the heart of his theory of general relativity or gravity, is the so-called equivalence principle, that inertial mass equals gravitational mass. Okay, so if you're able to reduce the gravitational mass of an object, then you also reduce the inertial mass. It's only a postulate. It hasn't been totally proven, but nobody has ever found any deviation as far as I know. So, although, by the way, scientists even to this day are looking for deviations to the equivalence principle of general relativity. And so I think that's basically what they're doing. They're not actually reducing the mass. They're effectively reducing the mass. That is, the mass is still there, but as far as the outside world is concerned, they don't see it. And in particular, Mach's principle, Mach's universe doesn't see that 20-ton mass. It sees only a much lighter object. And so that's what I think they're doing. Wow. And so that explains how they can accelerate. It also explains how they go into the bulk and travel to our planet. You got the whole thing combined into one technology, and that's what I think is happening.
What type of machinery or equipment could do those type of things? I mean, have you thought about that part of it?
Absolutely. And it also explains why UFOs have certain shapes. It's because in order to create KK gravitons and micro black holes, they are doing it in particle accelerators. What's the shape of a particle accelerator?
Well, it's circular, but not all UFOs are circular, though.
They are
triangular. There is a lot of
exactly. That's correct. But if you look at on the picture of my book there, the front page, take a look.
Yeah.
What do you see in the corners of the UFO? 3 bright circles.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's where the accelerators are on the triangle ones, and in the middle too. And see?
Yeah.
And notice that's where the glow is.
Yep.
That's where the particle accelerators are.
Well, you know about that picture, this picture in particular, right?
There's 2 of them. One was proven to be fraudulent.
Yeah.
But this is not that one. I have both of them in my book. If you look at the picture page, one, I put this one on the front page because it was actually a photographer who identified himself. But the other one, I decided to put inside the book because it looked different than the one on the front cover. It's kind of squatter, and I was puzzled why it looked different if they're both in Belgium. And then I found out later that the guy faked the picture with a styrofoam model.
Right.
So Leslie Kane told me about that too. But we both, by the way, I did avoid putting it on the cover, and I thank God I did, because I saw that there was no name given by the photographer. This is back in 2011, 12. When I wrote the book, And so when I saw that, I thought, gee, I better not put that on the cover in case it's eventually proven to be fake,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
it
Right,
turned
right.
out to be fake.
Yeah.
Um,
Can we?
but
I just want to say this. Uh, why don't we take some calls? I mean, I do have some questions. We did have some questions from chat come in, and I can always give you some of those questions. But seems like there's a lot of activity in the chat room, and people are listening. So
Okay.
all you have to do is look at the YouTube video, and you will see the call number there. I'll give it out one time, but just keep in mind for anyone listening later, that's only the only time that call line is ever active is during the show only. So the live show. And so that number is 603-967-4030. So if a call comes in, generally what I do is I'll answer it, and the person just has to wait until we get a break where they can talk. So I may have to interrupt you if you're right in the middle of something a little bit. So if anyone wants to call in, ask a really good question tonight, I'd appreciate it, and you're welcome to call in. For now, I'm just going to tell you one of the questions someone asked. Your theory relies on theoretical gravitation producing miniature black holes, but to prove their existence requires CERN, which is 16 miles in diameter.
Mm-hmm.
Does a UFO need to be that size?
No, that's a real good question, and I often get it actually. And no, people have probably heard of the physicist Michio Kaku.
Yeah.
Kaku. I think he's down at New York University, and he's on TV quite a bit. He's done a lot of science shows, but he talks about the technology behind particle accelerators is getting better and better over the years, and this I think we got a call. Technology they're going to be building tabletop accelerators in the not too distant future.
Oh, wow. How about that? So we do have a caller on the line, so just make sure you turn your volume down a little bit. Caller, your first name and where are you calling from?
Hey, this is David from New York.
Hi, David. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Just a quick question. Just wondering, would this produce any heat? Because of the recent videos, you see them flying cold on the IR, so I just wanted to know if that is in relation at all.
I think, David, that's a real good question. I believe that micro black holes, when they decay, and they decay very rapidly, will produce Hawking radiation. And so there will be radiation from these craft. However, there's a question of what this strong gravity field, the KK gravitons, create a very intense, and oddly enough, this is something I forgot to mention at the beginning of the show. One of the characteristics of UFOs is when they get very close to the ground, they often pick objects up from the ground. And that's a puzzle that has perplexed people for a long time, because if they're using anti-gravity, you would assume they'd be pushing things away. However, it would be explained by KK gravitons, which have a very strong gravitational field. But here's the key: KK gravitons have mass, so their gravitational field is very short range, and so that would explain why when the UFO would only have that effect when it got close to the ground. There was a real good case out in California in Death Valley, and you might be able to look this up on the internet, where some guys that were working at a hotel out there, I'm not sure why they'd have a hotel in Death Valley, but maybe it was on the edge of Death Valley. But anyway, they were walking home one evening, and they observed a spherical UFO that was close to the ground, and then it suddenly started rising up, and as it rose up, it picked up a whole bunch of rocks that were swirling around below it as it rose up in the sky, and the thing was glowing as it rose up, and then it got up to maybe a couple hundred feet, and the light blinked off momentarily, and all the rocks came cascading down, and then the light blinked back on, and the thing took off. So I think I think they're producing a short-range gravitational field, which may trap a lot of the radiation that's produced by the UFO, and And so that could be why I think you had mentioned earlier that they didn't see a heat signature from these
Right.
UFOs.
It was black on the
Yeah.
IR, right?
Yes, yeah, and that's quite interesting. But I do believe at times they do crank out quite a bit of radiation, maybe, for various, reasons.
Sure. Right.
Yeah, like I know that there was a guy, it was a terrible story. It might have been back in the 70s where a guy was in his house and he observed a UFO, a typical disc-shaped one, hovering over further back in his backyard. So he got so excited he ran outside and he ran directly under the UFO. Not a good idea.
Travis Walton, yeah.
Right, that was the Manitoba incident.
Oh, the Manitoba.
That was Stephen Michalak or whatever, up Falcon Lake.
Yeah.
But
right.
that was
Falcon Lake.
Yeah, this wasn't that one. This was a different one. I think it was up in the Chicago area. And the guy ran under the UFO. And the UFO, his wife came running out and she saw him under the UFO. And then she said the UFO kind of wobbled a little bit and then seemed to try to get over the garage, which was right near the guy, and get away from the guy. And then it quickly took off. And it appeared that the UFO operators were apparently surprised when the guy ran under it. And so the guy came back in, and this is an unfortunate, a sad story. He came back in and he complained of feeling very overheated and everything. So they took him to the hospital and he died. And they said that his internal organs were cooked as if he had been in a microwave.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Wow.
So they do, at least relatively close, they may have some heat, some serious radiation. But of course, don't forget too, the thing is levitating, and I believe they do have action-reaction engines. Even though they're able to reduce their weight, they don't want to reduce it down to absolute zero. They maintain a certain amount of weight for control purposes, and so they have to have a thrust of some type. And these particles might have been the microwave particles, or the photons at microwave wavelengths that cooked this poor guy,
Wow.
And so
there was an incident. Oh, sorry. There was an incident in Frank Edwards' book where he mentioned two pilots flying over some part of New York, and they encountered a UFO that blasted them with some sort of heat and turned off their planes, and they ended up crashing, killing a person in their car and smashing into a home.
Wow.
I remember that story, David. It happened in upstate New York, and it was a single plane, and it killed people on the ground. I think the pilots bailed out. I think you said that.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, but unfortunately, it killed some people on the ground. And I think that was a directed weapon and probably some kind of maser or something, laser maser or something like that, but they probably used infrared energy, and they were just discouraging the pilots from getting too close. But it had an unfortunate consequence. And you can see, I kind of know the UFO stories.
You do,
but you do too, David. You do too.
Yeah.
David, thank you.
I've been reading a lot.
Thank you so much for the call.
All right, take care, guys.
All right, bye.
You too.
All right, so just to let the callers know, when you call in, what happens is I'll answer, and you'll just hear the whole show going. Please have your computer down so it's not feeding back. So because we had a caller on there to go next, and they hung up. So just hang in. Once you call in, I will answer your call, and you'll just be live on the show until I can introduce you. So if anyone wants to call back in, that number's up on the screen. Here's another question that came in.
Okay.
Let's see. How did you get into theoretical physics given your corporate background?
As I had actually mentioned much earlier, I come from a family of scientists and engineers, and it's kind of in my blood, and I love it. I mean, it's kind of like for relaxation when my wife is driving the car, I'll crack open a physics book.
And it's better than a beer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cracking,
Oh, I love beer too.
well, cracking open a beer.
and
Yeah.
and so even though I worked in the corporate world, I should also mention, in college I have a degree in math and a degree in aerospace engineering. I originally really wanted to end up at NASA building rockets or something like that, and this is way back in the 70s. But by the early 70s, NASA was having budgetary cuts, and I realized the chances of a career there were like slim, and I switched over to a business major, and that's the history now.
Okay.
But now I'm back where I wanted to be in the first place.
And with retirement coming in.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So, caller, thanks for calling in. Your first name. Where are you calling from?
Oh, it's Bobby. I can't help calling.
Hey, Bobby. Bobby, I met down in North Carolina about 5 years ago, something like that.
3, I think.
No, it was more than 3. Definitely more than 3.
I had a couple questions. One is, does he think that they use fusion, and how much energy would it actually require to work in the way that he's describing that the UFOs work?
Bobby, that's a great question. That's a real good one. I do think they may use fusion, and I'll tell you why. Because you are probably aware that our nuclear generators right now are based on fission, and but they're working on trying to develop a fusion nuclear energy, and they haven't had much luck doing it. It's hard to keep the plasma contained. However, as you may have heard in my talk there, I believe these UFOs are creating KK gravitons. Okay, now I must emphasize that we haven't seen KK gravitons yet, but we think they do exist, and if the extra dimensions exist. So everybody, by the way, just as an aside here, everybody in the audience there should be watching what's going on at the Large Hadron Collider, because if they find these extra dimensions, then we may be on our way to solving the UFO enigma. But anyway, going back to your question, these KK gravitons create tremendous gravitational force. How strong? They can actually create micro black holes. And that's what I believe these UFOs are doing. But if they can do that, then they could also create fusion. At a lower strength, they can use fewer KK gravitons, and they could actually create fusion and sustained fusion in a container inside the UFO, where they could then use that energy. That's the first part of your question. The second part, I don't think they need that much energy. I'll tell you why. Because, okay, let's say they want to accelerate at 100 Gs. They can reduce the weight of the UFO effectively. It's not actual reduction of weight. It's only effective weight. Because if the inertial force is due to all the matter in the universe, then if the universe can no longer see that the UFO weighs 20 or 30 tons, and it sees it as only weighing maybe the weight of a bullet, then that UFO is free to shoot particles out the back and accelerate at 100 Gs. And I think that's what they're doing. And so that's how they are able to go at these phenomenal speeds. I think that was your question. I hope I got that right.
Yes, that was absolutely right, spot on. Matter of fact, I was going to tell you, one of the guys in the chat room, Philip Gillenwater, just said that Lockheed just filed a patent for a fusion-powered fighter, he had heard. But I'd also seen a YouTube video several years ago where somebody from Lockheed was actually talking about they were very close to having a refrigerator-sized sustained fusion reactor.
That's great. By the way, I should mention one other thing here. One of my brothers worked at Lockheed for like 25 years. So yeah, he loved it.
I bet. Robert, so we have someone, another person on the line. So
yeah, no problem.
Yeah, thanks for your call.
Thank you for your answers.
Yeah, thank you for the.
Thank you. So caller, thanks for waiting on hold. Where are you calling from, and your first name, please?
Hi, I'm Jack in West Palm Beach.
Hi, welcome to the show, Jack.
Hi, I've always wondered, quick question. in outer space, if there is no resistance, couldn't you achieve light speed eventually if you had a conventional type of craft or using, even nuclear type of power? If you just accelerated continuously, having no resistance, couldn't you eventually reach light speed?
Jack, you're absolutely right. It would take a little while. I've seen some articles on it where they say it would take 6 months or something, but it's definitely doable. And you just you just accelerate at 1 g so you don't squash the occupants. And but the beauty of a UFO is, I believe that they are able to prevent the inertial force from acting on the occupants inside the UFO. That's something else I forgot to mention earlier. And so whereas in a rocket you're limited by the G-forces that a human can take, and a human can't really take 2 or 3 Gs for 6 months in a row. So see what I mean? They can take 10 Gs for a very short period. Fighter jets, they have the G suits, they have the training, they can do these wild turns and stuff like that. But they can only do it for relatively short periods of time in emergency situations where they're dogfighting or whatever. But the beauty of a UFO is, as I had mentioned earlier in the talk here, if they can effectively separate themselves from the larger universe, and Mach's principle says inertia is due to all the matter in the larger universe, then the occupants inside would be protected from the inertial forces, which will keep them from being turned into pancakes, human pancakes. And so that's I think I answered the question, right?
Sure did. Thank you.
Yeah. Jack, thank you. And by the way, Jack, could I ask what the temperature is down in West Palm Beach?
No, I don't want to know.
Very warm today. Very warm. It was roughly 85, I think.
Oh, you lucky stiff.
I'm not complaining.
We are so cold up here. I can't wait for spring and real summer.
That's right. Yeah.
And, yeah.
All right. Thanks for the call, Jack.
Yeah, thank you, Jack.
You're welcome. Goodbye.
All right, so we have an open line if anyone wants to call in. Let's see, there was a... do I have that? I have the wrong questions here. The last question that this person sent in to me, have you approached Bigelow do you know Bob Bigelow? Have you ever thought, I'll go a little wider than this, but have you ever thought of getting funding for more research in what you're talking about?
I did check out if I could somehow contact Robert Bigelow, and I realized that, like any corporate CEO, he's pretty much surrounded by an impenetrable barrier, and there's no way to communicate with him. So other than KK gravitons, maybe. And but that's okay, because maybe one of these days he'll hear about what's being talked about here, and maybe he'll take an interest in it. But I came up. But I also should mention, I know this sounds crazy, but I've dreamed of winning the Powerball. Hasn't everybody, I guess? And I actually, I kind of, if I ever won the Powerball, I would just do the research myself. Oh, actually, one other, in relation to that, as one of the things that really is critical is this: whether somebody helps fund the research. I don't know. I hope it happens, but I don't know if it will. But I can say this: that there may be things that UFO researchers are within our means, that we can pool our money together, or what do they call those?
GoFundMe's.
GoFundMe, that thing. Those kind of things. Maybe something like that could do it. But I came up with a great idea. if we can get one of these GoFundMe type things, and we could get a project going, who's that guy that was the special effects guy for Star Wars and all those things?
God.
B.
I've had him on my show before. Doug Trumbull. You got it.
Doug Trumbull. And he lives actually here in Massachusetts. I live in Eastern Mass. He lives way out in the far west. When he's not in California, the lucky stiff. And but Doug Trumbull, a few years ago, came up with this neat idea of converting a Humvee, and with a roof. You probably have seen it.
Yeah.
The UFO something or other.
UFO Todd.
That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, UFO photography, where the roof opens up and all this instrumentation comes out, and it's a mobile platform for going out and collecting UFO data. My thought is this, that UFOs often occur in waves, like the Belgian UFO wave that went on for like a year. And the Hudson Valley UFO wave, that went on for like 2 years, I think. The Phoenix Lights occurred for over many months. So you have these UFO waves around the country. If you could, if you had the equipment ready that you could take down there, and I'll tell you why this is so critical. I get a little excited because I know if we can get this data, it'll be very, very important. If we detect as I mentioned before, if these UFOs are producing micro-black holes, they'll decay into Hawking radiation. And now Hawking radiation has a particular spectral signature. And so we ought to be able to, if we can get the equipment out there and get it aimed at these UFOs, like in the Hudson Valley, and we can pick up, and if we detect Hawking radiation, it might be rather difficult because they might have to be rather close. The Hawking radiation would dissipate through the atmosphere, would have to triangulate, would have to have 2 or 3 of these vehicles, the Doug Trumbull Humvees, and so triangulate, so to make sure we know the precise distance of the object, so we can calculate how much the radiation has been attenuated from the UFO. But if we do detect the signature of Hawking radiation, which, by the way, has never been seen before by the scientific community, that, by the way, would be a gigantic feather in the cap of UFO researchers, because we would actually have spectrographic data showing Hawking radiation coming from UFOs, which would then demonstrate that they are creating these micro-black holes to swallow gravitons, and the KK gravitons go along with that as well. So that's why this is so exciting. Would need funding to do this, but not millions of dollars. We could probably get by on hundreds of thousands, and would have to be a little bit careful here. We'd need to bring in some experts on Hawking radiation and spectral radiation, and because these UFOs may be emitting other types of radiation too, that might not be electromagnetic. It could be, for example, alpha rays and beta rays. Beta rays are electrons. Alpha rays are helium nuclei and things like that. And so they might be emitting other types of particles and radiation. And so we'd need to have instrumentation, we'd need to have gamma ray detectors, X-ray detectors, the whole gamut, and would have to be able to synthesize all this and put it into a graph. And there is an experiment occurring down in South America. I can't remember the name of it. But it's designed to detect Hawking radiation from cosmic rays hitting the upper atmosphere, and they put these detectors way up in the mountain's top, where much of the like 12,000 feet up or whatever, where the atmosphere is much thinner above that, and the idea is that they think that cosmic rays that come in at near the speed of light can actually create a micro-black hole, which would decay and then create Hawking radiation. And if we could get the scientists that are involved with that project to help us in our project to design the instrumentation that we need, that's what we need. And unfortunately, that would take money, and so, but maybe GoFundMe could do it or something like that.
All right. We have another caller. Caller, we don't have a lot of time, but we have some time for you. Your first name and where are you calling from?
Dennis Singlevix from South Bend, Indiana.
Hi, Dennis. Welcome to the show. You have a question for our guest?
Yes. I just wanted to ask what his opinion was if they have the technology to get here, and there's so many sightings that, that people see, daily, yearly. What kind of information would they need to keep coming that many times to find out? And just, like we go to the moon, we don't go there and stay there. We don't, go there every so often with all these thousands of sightings. Why would they come in here so much like that when they couldn't observe? I'm trying how to explain it. Why do they have to keep coming so many times?
Yeah, I got the gist of it. There's an issue with your phone, so I think he was saying why would they? Thanks for the call. I think he was trying to say why would they keep coming here so many times? That is a question I've asked myself a lot. I mean, that is a puzzling question.
Dennis, that's a great question, a really good question. Why would they come here so many times? Well, number one, I believe they're coming from many different civilizations. So they're not necessarily repeating the trip. Okay. So, and number two, curiosity. Just like humans are very curious, as intelligence evolves in a species, one of the hallmarks of intelligence is curiosity. Why do things happen? Why does this happen? So they're going to be wondering about the rest of the universe. And Dennis, I think that's what they are doing. But you didn't ask this question, but I think I might mention one other thing that's very important. How come they haven't made contact with us? And Dennis, you didn't happen to ask that question, but I would like to propose an answer to it. So I believe they haven't made contact because they don't, for two reasons. They do not want to interfere with a developing civilization. And I'll give you an example of that. In the Philippines back in the 1990s or something, they discovered this very primitive tribe. Many people don't know this, but the Philippines is an archipelago with hundreds and hundreds of islands that are isolated, many of which have never been explored. But they found this primitive tribe, and they literally were in the Stone Age and were not even aware of modern humans. And so the first thought that had occurred to many people was, well, we'll bring in a Kmart, we'll bring in a McDonald's, and we'll introduce them to civilization, and they can buy rifles and stuff and so on like that from, but then somebody said, wait a minute, if we give them all these McDonald's stuff and they're used to a diet of fish, they may not be adapted to cheeseburgers and French fries, and they may end up with diabetes and all that. And then if we give them rifles, they might not use it just for hunting. They might use it against each other, and we'd have a huge problem on our hands. And so they suddenly said, maybe we'll do a wait-and-see approach. We'll just let them develop at their own pace. And I think that's what the alien civilizations are doing. And the fact that they're probably coming from many different civilizations, but the fact that they all act in the same manner, that is, they all don't make direct contact with us, suggests that there may be an overarching organization like a galactic federation or universal federation of advanced civilizations that has a protocol. You do not interfere with developing civilizations. And time-wise,
yeah, we're out of time. We got out of time already. I can't believe it.
Oh my gosh! So
yeah,
I hope that answered the question for Dennis.
Yeah, thank you. And I really wanted to read this. We only have 30 seconds left here. We had this is from Jay Allen in the chat. We had 2 UFOs above our runway at our military base. 0 sounds, nothing on radar. Oddly, they hovered like they were floating on water, undulating. Curious flight dynamics. Wave-based. He's asking you, could it be wave-based?
The undulation is because remember I had said their weight is very light, so that means that wobble. Do you know, you take a frisbee, if you want to throw it across the yard, what do you do to throw it across the yard? You spin.
Yeah.
You spin it,
Yeah.
and you spin it to stabilize it. And if you notice, these UFOs spin too. That strongly suggests they're effectively very lightweight, so they have to spin to stabilize. But that also means that they're likely to be wobbly a little bit because they are so effectively light. They are affected by air currents, believe it or not, and so they're going to wobble a little bit. And even though they're able to stay in roughly one position, but that's why. Oops, sorry.
We are out of time. Thanks so much, Robert. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been a real pleasure, as always. I can't believe we filled up all that time so fast. All right.
And incredible.
All right.
We'll
Thanks.
talk to you later.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye. All right, everyone. So that's it for the show. Thank you. And let's see. I don't want to hang up on our show producer, and I've done that before. Let's try to do it this way. Okay. So thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I thought it was a great show tonight. And we'll be back. We're going to go the whole 90 degrees or 360 degrees different. Next week, we're going to have Mike McClellan on. He's going to be talking about owls and UFOs. He's got a new book out. We're going to be talking about that. And thanks so much for supporting the show or listening on YouTube or listening on the Dark Matter Digital Network. I want to thank Peggy for managing the Facebook page, Alejandro Rojas for the news, Evan for producing the show, and our guest, of course, Robert Schroeder. Thanks so much, everyone, and remember to keep your eyes to the sky.